Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I've got quite a lot of books to talk to you about. The start of February's been really good for me for reading, and so this is going to be wrap up number 3 of the year, and well, let's dive in because there's so much to talk about. The first book that I want to talk to you about I actually listened on audiobook, and that was Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. I listened to this book because I'd heard about someone else saying that listening to it on audiobook was really good because you got the music to go with it. The book centred very heavily around music, and there is 3 interlocking stories throughout this, following 3 different children in different times. And we start the book with a bit of a myth, and then there is this harmonica that is mentioned that we then follow through different children and their stories. I quite enjoyed this. It was okay, but it did sort of lose a little bit for me in its meaning. It was quite easy to listen to, and I really enjoyed the musical parts of it. I liked that we flitted between these different stories. I think it just lost its meaning for me. I don't know whether that's because I listened to it over quite a long period of time, whether it's because I was listening to it in small chunks, but it just, I don't know, there was something that was lost there that I didn't manage to garner from the story in order for it to have made complete sense for me in the end, and to completely have sort of wrapped up how I would have liked. On the plus side, I did really like the storytelling. I really enjoyed the prose. I thought the writing was very beautiful, very lyrical. It definitely filled me with this sense of wonder, and I really felt that I was in these different places with these children. I just think the ending for me, I just felt a bit like, what? There needed to be more. It's hard to explain. I would recommend listening to it. If you're going to go and try this book, I would definitely recommend that you listen to it, because I do think that the music brought a little bit more to it. Although when it's on 2.5 speed, the music does sound a bit strange, so it's one of those ones that it's possibly better to sort of slow down a little bit. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. The next book I picked up is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. This is a book I've had on my shelf for a while. It was sat in a pile of books which all had a same theme, and that theme is rape. So trigger warnings in here for sexual assault and rape. In this we follow our main character Eden, and at the very start of the story, so this isn't a spoiler, something happens to her which changes her. It happens to her, she doesn't feel she can tell anyone, and it totally changes the person that she is, the person that she's going to be, the person that she becomes. And it's a really interesting study into how events out of your control, how things that happen to you can have such a lasting impression on your life. We follow Eden, and the book is split into parts, and each of these parts is a different year for her at school. And so we have freshman, sophomore, junior and senior years, and I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the look into how it made Eden and her sexuality and her promiscuity and how she feels and thinks about her body. I enjoyed the thrilling element of it, how it made me feel. I didn't feel good when I was reading this. I felt incredibly anxious, like I needed to read on. I needed something to happen. I needed for her to get closure. I needed for her to be better. I really rooted for this character. I enjoyed the look at relationships and forging relationships after something like this has happened to you, and I just thought it was a really good book. It lacked a little something that tipped me over the edge into a 5-star, but it's a really strong 4-star, and I really enjoyed it. As I say, you know, be aware there are triggers here for sexual assault and rape. And I should have said that at the start of this story, our main character Eden is 13. Next, in what appears to be a bit of a trend in my reading, I read The Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed, and again this is a book with the topic of rape as its centre. This book follows 3 main girls and 3 main points of view. We have a girl called Grace who moves to a small town in America. She moves there, her mother was part of a big church. She is a female preacher, and they have moved to this new smaller place for her mother because her mother was sort of shunned from what happened in their church because she started speaking out and becoming more liberal. They've moved to this new town for a fresh start, and Grace moves into a house. In her bedroom in the house there is writing on the walls. Someone has written there in desperation saying they need help, and so she becomes intrigued about this writing. We have Rosina. She is Mexican American, and she is working, she's at school, she's working hard in her family restaurant. She takes care of her many cousins, and she is just struggling to have any sort of life outside of the family, and she is desperate to have a life. She's desperate to do things that normal girls do, and yet she feels stifled, and she particularly hates her school and her local community. She has very strong opinions about things. She knows of a girl at school who caused a stir the year previous, who is called Lucy. We find out very early on that Lucy accused 3 members of the football team of raping her, of gang raping her. She was not believed, and this led to Lucy and her family finally leaving the community and moving out of state. It is Lucy's house that Grace has moved into. Rosina is also a lesbian, so there's some good representation of that in here. And then our third character is Erin. Erin is autistic, and she is struggling in school to form social connections, and she begins to form friendships with Rosina and also with Grace. And we're just following a way for these girls to fight back against the oppression of their school, the sexism that goes on, the unfair way that certain members of the school community, like football players, are treated, and a way for them to achieve justice for Lucy and for girls that are going through similar situations, and for all the girls. And so to do that, they set up the Nowhere Girls. I don't want to spoil any more because I think it's really good to read it for yourself. Again, a really strong read, one I really enjoyed, that felt very empowering, and I gave this one 4 stars. And actually, in a very similar vein, but not starting off because of a rape, but starting off because of some injustices in school, I want to talk about Moxie, which is by Jennifer Matthew. This has very similar vibes to Nowhere Girls in the fact that we feel like we're in a very small town. There is certain members of the school, like the football players, who are treated differently to others, and we look heavily in this book into the treatment of people above others, and especially the divide between male and female, the expectations of the men in this book and the expectations of the females, and the way that certain people, certain adults force the hand of females, and the way that certain people are treated unfairly. Our main character in this is Viv. She's brought up by a single mother who works really hard and works long hours as a nurse. They live next door to her grandparents. Viv's mother in the 80s or 90s, I think it's the 90s, was part of this riot girl movement. She was outspoken. She was into politics and punk music and fighting for equality, and a feminist. And it's looking at how she has this box now, and Viv feels like her mother has sort of changed quite a lot because they've had to move home when her father dies when she's a baby, and so she feels like her mum is different now, but her mum has this box which contains all of the different things that she did when she was younger: photos, pamphlets, zines, and music. And it inspires Viv to set up a organisation, a secret organisation called Moxie, that looks to fight back against what is going on at her school. And it's very out of character for Viv, and so she keeps it a secret. And we just follow what happens at the school, how this starts, the girls working together, and I don't want to say any more because I think it will be a spoiler, but it was really good. it had a very similar vibe to Nowhere Girls, with this female empowerment and looking at well, this looked quite well at feminism, and not just feminism in the fact that, oh, we're girls, we need to have better, blah blah blah. This was a look at feminism in equality for all, and how both male and female people can be feminists, and that feminism isn't some awful word that has these connotations that only girls or women can be feminists. I really enjoyed that part of it. We have male feminists and men standing up for women's rights and for standing up for equality and equality for all. I really enjoyed that part of it, so I thought this was a really good book as well, and I gave this one 4 stars. I then read a duology which was by Amy Engel, and that was The Book of Ivy and The Revolution of Ivy. These were incredibly quick reads. I think I read them both in a day apiece. They're only a couple of 100 pages long, and so I didn't find them difficult reads, and they were definitely page turners. The first in this duology is The Book of Ivy, and in this we're following Ivy. She is so they live in a place where there's been sort of war has ravaged, and there's only been a number of people that have survived, and 2 big prominent families have sort of battled and fought to become the head of this sort of town or city, or this cordoned off area, and the ones that have won have set up as a dictatorship, and the family run everything, and there are rules and regulations that people follow. And one of those rules is that every year the 16-year-old men of the ruling class marry 16-year-old girls of the family and the group that lost this battle. And then also another point in the year, the men of the losing side marry the 16-year-olds of the winning side. And so basically they're aiming to sort of assimilate and mix people up together in the hope that war won't happen again if your daughter is married into one side or the other. Anyway, Ivy comes from, she is the granddaughter of the man that led this initial sort of revolution battle on the lower side, and the son of the president on the ruling side is marrying her, and that happens in the very first page of the book. So they get married, and we know from the very start that her family has actually sent her on a mission to kill this man that she's married, in order to then bring down the ruling class and to bring down the president, his father, and in order to overthrow him. And so she goes into this marriage knowing that this is the plan, and yet things that happen change her mind, and we just follow that really. We follow the repercussions of making your own decisions, veering away from what your family think is right to making decisions for yourself. We look at both sides, and both sides have their flaws, and it's a really good fast-paced story. And then the second book follows on from where the first book left off, and we're in a slightly different setting, which I really enjoyed, and the story rounded up really well. I didn't enjoy the second one quite as much as the first. The first one I just really felt invested in, and I think I quite liked the romantic element in it and the potential for that. The second one I did enjoy. I think this would make quite a good TV series, sort of like a 6-parter TV series. There was some really interesting parts in it. It's quite violent. If you betray the town, if you do something wrong in this particular system, they don't have prisons for people. People just get put outside the fence. So the fence is manned and armed, and if you you know, steal or cheat or rape or anything like that, you get put outside the fence and left to fend for yourself, and no one really knows what there is out there and if there is any survivors. and I found that quite interesting, and an interesting idea where we looked at how you know, someone stole a loaf of bread and they got kicked out, and then there was someone that had raped a small child and they got put out, and it was the inequality of the punishment for the crime, which I thought was really interesting. So a good book. First one I gave 4 stars. Second one not quite as good as the first, so I ended up giving that one 3 stars. I'm conscious that I have now spoken for quite a while, so I will wrap up my final book that I read recently and finished quickly. I read this over the month of January and the beginning of February, and that is this beast of a book, which is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This, I mean, this truly is a beast of a book. It's coming up to 850-ish pages, and it was a daunting book, one that I'd wanted to read but I'd been too nervous to. And when Ange and myself, Ange from Beyond the Pages, decided to set up a read long on Goodreads, we decided to do it in manageable chunks, so about 150 pages a week. I thought that was a really good idea to just get myself going with this book. And I went in with it with trepidation because I kind of know that Westerns aren't my thing. It's not something that I've ever been that interested in, but I had heard such great things about this, so I wanted to give it a fair shot. And I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. However, I did end up very quickly putting it on audiobook because I found that it was much easier to listen to in that way, and so I did listen to this on audio. It was quite a good audio. It's quite old now, so that did, you could tell that it was a bit old, and there was no sort of chapters. It just sort of carried on. The story is centered in, it says here, the 1880s. And we are following 2 sort of main characters, but there is sort of a band of main characters. But the very 2 main characters in this are Cal and Gus, and they are ex-Texas Rangers, I think. And at the start of this, we're in this town called Lonesome Dove. There's one bar which has a prostitute that lives upstairs that all the men use and pay their money for, and some are half in love with. It's one of those towns where they work kind of hard and then they just sit around chatting and drinking lots. Gus is probably my favourite character. He just chats a lot. He's just full of chat and talk, and probably our more comical character in here. Cal is much more serious and focused and driven to work. They end up going on this cattle drive. They take these cattle from where they are in the Rio Grande to Montana, and it is about the people we meet on the way and the relationships. And there is a definite sense here of this sort of distance that they travel and this solitary lifestyle and the way that people live, and the bandits and the Indians and the way women are treated. And I think for me, that's probably my hardest part of this book that really I struggled with. Was it's very male-centric, it's very chauvinistic, it's sexist. I mean, it is, and yet there are some women in here who are forging lives for themselves and are sort of not masters of their fate, but are, you know, taking control of their lives. But yeah, I just didn't like the way that men treated women or talked about women. Most of the women that you find in here, not all, but most of the women in here you see are prostitutes or you know, can't fend for themselves. There's one character in here, it's quite refreshing, who can, and I really struggled with that. I didn't like the way this was, but you know, this is probably quite a realistic portrayal of how things were in those times. So it was good to read, even if it wasn't really for me. I don't think that I'm going to read a Western again. It just wasn't for me at the end of the day. I enjoyed it, and there was parts of it where I did want to keep picking it up, but I don't think that I would have continued to read this had it would have been me on my own. So I would say the first maybe 500 pages were sitting on a 3-star, and then the last few hundred pages really picked up for me, and I actually ended up giving it 4 stars. It was just a 4-star for me, but I did really enjoy it, and I definitely say don't be scared of this. If it's the size that you're worried about and you do want to read it, don't be scared. And if you ever want to go and read the comments that we had during the read along, feel free to join that group and read it at your own pace and follow on our comments and make comments in there yourself, because I'm sure that myself and Ange and anybody else will be more than happy to come and talk to you. So it's worth a read. I'm glad I've read it, but it's not one that's going to be sitting on my best books ever shelf. So that is a lot of the books that I've read recently. I'm not going to spend too long wrapping up here and saying goodbye, because that is a lot of books that I've got through. Let me know if you've read any of these, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Bye for now, BookTube.